Hi everyone, I'm Douwe. I'm very happy to introduce you to the next panel. And you see my pictures in here, but don't worry, I have nothing to do on this one. It will be Windsor Holden, Principal Research Consultant at Kaleido Intelligence. Hello, Windsor.
Hi, Dario.
It will be you to manage it and take the full scene of this. So thanks, first of all, and welcome to MEF.
Thank you very much.
I think it's the first time I see you, Windsor, in here. I love to get this to be a recurring event to have you around here. The report that we have from Kaleido Intelligence on BCE, so the next evolutions of billing and charging for roaming. Super valuable, great read. Thank you very much. And it's available on our website for everybody. But also today, if you go to the expo areas, you can download it. Don't do it straight away. Or do it straight away, but read it later, because right now, even better. Let's listen to Windsor. I think that shortly, just happening now, we should also have Xavier and Douwe. I think Xavier is joining as we speak. So, Windsor, thanks again, and we'll speak soon. If there are some questions, I will appear at the end, just to tell you what the people are saying. Okay, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dario. Now, we should have a presentation that we've provided loaded up, so excellent. So, yes, just essentially to, as a bit of an introduction, we're wanting to look at really how the evolution of billing and charging is evolving, and particularly with regards to BCE. So to begin with, just as a little précis, I'll be looking at the primary roaming settlement challenges, and then looking at how these can be potentially resolved using BCE, and then specifically looking at the benefits of BCE around areas such as wholesale roaming automation, implementing new commercial models, and resolving disputes. So could we have the next slide, please, Sam? Thanks very much. Now, as a little bit of background, the first TAP specification was released by the GSMA 26 years ago now. So that was the mechanism by which the operators are exchanging roaming billing information. Now, while the specifications evolved to support a number of new services, the procedures aren't capable of keeping pace with the number of devices and technologies which are now roaming across the networks. So what we've got now is this emergence of IoT ecosystems, where the physical devices and the vehicles are inter-networked to facilitate the use of technologies such as big data, AI, and automation. Now, there's really three fundamental problems here from a roaming perspective. First of all, you've got a surge in data volumes. Secondly, you've got a massive increase in the number of device profiles that have to be identified. And thirdly, you've got a far greater number of network technologies in use. Now, if we look at the chart on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that we've made some estimates about the growth in IoT and data traffic. So we're estimating that roaming devices will increase from just over 200 million in 2019 to 1.4 billion by the middle of the next decade, while in the same time period, the volume of data traffic generated by these devices is going to rise from around about 111 petabytes per annum to 820 petabytes per annum. Now, this in turn is going to place a massive strain on IPX, potentially impacting on performance and increasing costs. So that's point one. Second, systems and procedures which have been designed purely around individual uses of mobile handsets for voice and data, such as TAP, are going to struggle to distinguish between a human using a smartphone and a piece of connected machinery. So MNOs have used TAP for, as I said, 26 years, where the CDRs are sent by the visited network to the home network via a third-party clearinghouse, and that's responsible for the transmission and conversion of the files. However, you move on to 5G and IoT, and it can't differentiate between the traffic types, nor can it support the low level of detailed billing that's required. So what that means is you've got, if you want to monetize this, you need labor intensive manual settlement. And in fact, if you're looking at IoT, it could cost more to implement the tap billing, than the revenue generated through the process, as you're generating the records on a daily basis. So that also means that legacy billing models are impractical, in that many roaming devices are also generating significant numbers of events, and thus just using the events are using network resource in the form of location updates, but they're not actually consuming that much data. They're also silent for large periods of time, again, still using resource, so the current system doesn't charge them. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Now, if we look at the perceived barriers, there's really three that we've been looking at, which is essentially complexity, cost, and expense, and necessity. Okay, as we said, TAP can't cope with the combination of soaring roaming traffic, the decoupling of retail and wholesale, and the need to identify and distinguish between these new kinds of traffic. Now, in addition to a sharp rise in revenue leakage, any future reliance on TAP would add substantially to any manual input required for settlement. So you've got a prospect of a massive increase in the number of CDRs which generate no revenues. BCE has been specifically designed to simplify this process, including alternate billing and settlement options, and is far more adaptable to work with wholesale roaming discount agreements. Now, while TAP's relying on invoices generated for each event, BCE, by contrast, is enabling billing based on usage data aggregated on a per day basis. It's only going to be used in cases where there are bilateral agreements between the operators. Now, in terms of implementation and integration, there are significant procedural differences, and I'll just go into them very briefly. Now, for example, under TAP, the files are sent daily. You've got the notification file sent if there's no traffic. Under BCE, under the bilateral agreements, the frequency is up to what's agreed between the two parties. Now, with TAP, you've got a returns account procedure for rejects and disputes. BCE, you've got a reporting format that covers the need to invoke DDRs if required. But there are still a shared number of common elements, including agents and the TADIC codes used as the primary identifiers. Now, yes, there is a certain amount of complexity here and difference with the existing, with the status quo, but from a practicality standpoint, and to reduce any disruption, the implementation should ideally occur at a point where an operator or their partners are launching new services, such as an updated IoT portfolio, so your service is optimized for billing and charging at the outset. So let's look at the cost element. Now, certainly what we would say is for in-house implementation, this could be a significant barrier. You know, all MNOs doing it in-house would need to create a billing statement report. They have to apply a rating to it, send it to their partner for reconciliation, and then create the charging document. Now, the alternate here is to outsource the entire process to the data clearing houses, as a large number already do with TAP. Now, in cases where the different MNOs were served by different clearing houses, then they too would be party to the agreements. The raw data would be extracted for both TAP and BCE before being sent to the clearinghouse agent in the agreed format. The agent would separate and package the traffic according to the given criteria, generate the TAP or BCE reports, and reconcile the BCE with the served network data before the settlement takes place. Now, the other beauty of using the outsourced approach, it means from an MNO perspective, you don't have to maintain dedicated compliance specialists in-house. Now, even for a tier one operator, the roaming department would typically comprise a small team within a much larger IT department. And so keeping abreast of both local evolving standards and issues such as key local regulations, that would be a significant drain on time, and it would be very inefficient. Now, thirdly, in terms of what the perceived barriers are. It's, do we have to do it? And the answer really is yes. TAP is just too complex, too expensive. It's difficult to upgrade. It's going to remain static for the foreseeable future. It's not going to support any future charging models. So you also need to realize that there's no other industry approved alternatives emerging to BCE. So it's going to become the de facto replacement for TAP for wholesale roaming. So if you want to decouple wholesale and retail roaming, and if you want to monetize these new services, these new business models, you're really going to have to deploy BCE. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thanks. So, okay, let's look at the potential benefits of moving to BCE. Well, from an automation perspective, at the present time, the existing processes, clearing and settlement is something like 15% of an operator's of an MNO's operating profits, according to Deloitte's. There was a white paper a couple of years ago by Rowan that claimed that the mobile industry is paying on average something like $6 in overhead cost per roamer to settle roaming transactions in terms of overhead costs. Now, the key benefit, or one of the key benefits to be derived from BCE is the automation of this process based on bilateral agreements, as I've said, with the reports and settlements occurring at agreed intervals. So this could be annually, monthly, quarterly, rather than the existing traditional rigid settlement windows. So for an MNO, you're now saving on monthly and annual settlement costs. It's also automating processes such as the support for in-house control and self-validation of invoices, and the reconciliation ensures pre-invoicing audit of data. Again, if we look at the figure on the right-hand side, these are our latest set of forecasts. We're estimating that something like 10 billion in wholesale roaming revenues will be settled annually using BCE within 5 years, and that'll represent around about 47% of total wholesale roaming revenues from IoT and consumer mobile roaming traffic globally. It'll be even higher in North America, around about 50%, and in Europe and Central Asia, something like 62%. Could we then go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Because the other benefit here is that BCE enables you to introduce new commercial models. So, I mean, these might include, for example, charging on a per IMSI per day basis where the records are combined into a single monthly report. You're looking at volume-based charging or threshold-based charging where the charging or the discount applied is going to change when a threshold is met. So this will allow differential charging per gigabyte depending on whether aggregated traffic is, for example, LTE or NB-IoT. It can also support use cases where the wholesale amount is a fixed charge, regardless of the usage or the number of devices connected. It will additionally support mutual forgiveness in instances where the charges are zero. So, for example, Kaleido, again, predicts that by implementing the BCE-based day pass model, where operators are able to monetize permanently roaming low traffic IoT devices through the use of a fixed fee per IMSI per day, the operators could generate something like an extra 2 billion in revenues annually by 2026. The rationale behind this is we looked at the number of permanently roaming devices generating low volume of traffic. By low volume, we're saying less than 10 meg per month last year. And even at that point, you're looking at something like 125 million permanently roaming devices. And it's this ability of BCE to distinguish between and therefore facilitate monetization of different types of IoT traffic, particularly over NB-IoT, that most of the operators regard as the most compelling reason for deployment in the first instance. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now here, we're looking at a couple of key benefits, which is dispute resolution and agreement standardization. Now, within TAP, the dispute management is very slow, it's very cumbersome, there's numerous discrepancies emerging around usage reconciliation and the rating structures. By contrast, you've got a much faster, easier dispute resolution process with BCE. If a dispute arises, the parties will simply exchange the detailed DDRs. Additionally, you can also align the telco contracts potentially using a blockchain infrastructure, which allows you to streamline all the processes. And now, as a result of that, payment discrepancy analysis and dispute resolution takes minutes, where it currently takes several days because you're going back and forth in this iterative process between the different providers. Now, discount agreements take the form of annexes to the standard international roaming agreements and specify commercial terms and prices. These are complex, labor-intensive, and disparate. There's no agreed standards on how these should operate or be presented. Now, even standard settlements are taking 45 days on average. The process for discounted settlement can take up to 12 months. It's a very long, drawn-out procedure, leads to weak revenue leakage, weak revenue assurance. Now, I briefly want to touch on the relationship between BC and blockchain. Telefónica's CEO has said there's a mental connection between blockchain and BCE, and it's in turn linked to the arrival of 5G and 5G roaming. And that's certainly true when you look at what the GSMA has been doing in terms of the blockchain for wholesale roaming initiative to create an open source settlement application with an end product that needed to be interoperable, integrable, scalable, efficient, secure, and address operator privacy concerns and be able to handle both TAP and BCE. Now, in terms of what's happening within the application, both parties are uploading data visible in the deal timeline. When a discount agreement is entered, it's comprised of general, discount, and signature information. Now, finally, before I bring on the other panelists, I would like to talk on one other potentially crucial BCE benefit, which is that it supports high volumes of data. Now, given that TAP was designed in the first instance to record voice calls, it's maybe not surprising that it only supports up to 100 petabytes. Now, while this is not at present an issue for billing, the emergence of high usage IoT may mean that within a very few years, roaming devices may be using data levels in excess of this. So if you look at, for example, what's happening in automotive, which has got the potential to exceed 10 exabytes per month, these figures by the middle of the next decade, these figures are likely to increase exponentially by the end of the decade as fully autonomous vehicles gain traction. So you use data above 100 PB, that's simply not recorded, huge revenue limits. Conversely, BCE supports data volumes based on petabytes and can even get up to yottabytes. Now, just to recap then, as an operator, you may have concerns about potential costs and disruptions. With the aid of partners, these barriers are likely to be far less significant than you think. Secondly, I hope I've managed to illustrate the scale of the benefits which will accrue from deployment, both in terms of achieving cost savings and developing new revenue streams. Now, I'd like to bring in my fellow panelists, Douwe van der Heij from Syniverse and Xavier Bourgois from BICS. Are we both on?
Hi, Windsor.
Oh, yes.
I'm on.
Hi, excellent. So, Douwe, do you want to give a little bit of background on Syniverse and what you've been doing in the space before we move on to specific questions?
Sure. So as Syniverse, we are, of course, the leader in roaming, clearing, and settlement. But we're also chairing the BCE GSMA working group. So we've been talking about billing and charging evolution for quite a while with the operators and the market, both in GSMA context, but also, of course, in a relationship that we have already established.
And Xavier.
Hi, Windsor. Yeah,
Hiya.
so at BICS, we are really enabling roaming and facilitating roaming enablement for our customers. So providing iPICs, so signaling roaming app services. And we are focusing for the moment, especially on the deployment of NB-IoT and LTM, for which BCE is really the avenue to go for the roaming settlement, I would say.
Okay. So to kick off then, a question for Douwe, specifically. I mean, well, not wanting you to name specific operators, and if obviously you might not be in a position to, but how many operators roughly are you talking to at the moment for BCE in terms of trials and deployments?
We're obviously speaking to anyone that
Yeah.
wants to hear about the topic. First of all, over the past year and a half, we've really been on an educational journey. So thanks for helping with that today, Windsor. I think this session, the preceding slides were very helpful in terms of understanding benefits. Why do it at all? Why change, right? So that's been very key, and obviously we're talking solutions as well. There are large groups of operators that have signed up already with us for implementation of service, and we've implemented customer live service running. So from 2020 to 2021, we're starting to see real live use of BCE in practice.
I mean, moving forward then, how do you see this evolving as we move forward over the next couple of years in terms of, activity kicking on?
Well, as far as we can conclude right now, the IoT is really the driver. So Xavier is point on there. IoT is desperately in need of a monetization solution for wholesale that scales and that is profitable and can help IoT roaming scale across the globe. So that initially is the main driver, and I think that will quickly be followed by 5G and other legacy data services. That is what I see between now and 2025 is going to be kind of the main use cases for BCE. Voice and SMS are, of course, considered for the standard of BCE, though I will think they will be sort of the laggards, the late followers.
Now, Xavier, what do you think has been the impact on the time frame of what we've been going through the past 18 months of COVID?
Well, I think that the COVID had a double impact on BCE. So on one side, with the decrease of roaming traffic during the pandemic, with a ban on travel, so the roaming revenues have dramatically decreased. So with limited roaming revenues, many operators are facing issues to make new investment and to justify maybe the move to BCE at this stage. So the pandemic might have caused a delay on adopting BCE and on the BCE the deployment. On the other side, so during the pandemic, many operators have seen that the roaming traffic was not down to zero. And looking closer, so they discovered that many foreign SIMs were still located on their network, and very few of them were generating a lot of traffic. So it was also very low traffic. So while looking at this, so they discovered that it was mainly machine-to-machine traffic and permanent roaming, and that the level of this traffic was much higher than they were thinking. So for many operators, COVID-19 was an eye-opener. And with the help of analytic tools, provided by vendors, like we have Big Smart Analytics, so operators can really further analyze and quantify this machine-to-machine traffic. So Tier 1 and Tier 2 operators are really busy at this stage to define the strategy for machine-to-machine traffic and to see how they want to apply new pricing models like IMSI-based monthly fees. And this has really created a positive impact on BCE because those new pricing models are very difficult to implement in TAP. And so Tier 1 and Tier 2 operators will really need BCE to automate those new pricing models for machine-to-machine.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the Tier 2s there, Xavier, because this is a question I'm I'm going to put it to Douwe, but again, if you want to come in afterwards, feel free. To what extent do you see, and again, it's a time frame for the tier twos requiring BCE, because at the moment, and obviously, the initial activity is not exclusively, but overwhelmingly being driven by the tier one players.
Yeah, so if you ask me, there's two sides to the story always. Of course, there's the sending and the receiving, or the serving and the served part, and definitely tier 2 or even tier 3 networks may very well be suitable to host IoT traffic. It depends on their company strategy, whether they have dedicated IoT networks or whether they do that on the back of the existing 4G and lower networks. Mm-hmm. So I see this is not a tier 1 only development. It's driven perhaps by the tier 1s, but it's going to be applicable to everybody.
Now, again, and picking up on what I was saying about the different business models, again, from talking to the MNOs, do you think most of them will seek to embrace the effectively the clearinghouse model? Are you getting any sense of many of them wanting to go it alone, or will it be, again, overwhelmingly using the clearinghouse third-party approach?
I think the just like standardization, the function of a clearinghouse has worked very well in the past, and there's little reason to assume that would be different right now. It is important, of course, for operators to make changes, mainly automation. And with the extensive connectivity, which is going to be even more with IoT than any preceding service, I do think there needs to be automation and a good level of efficiency added to scale that IoT business and to scale other services. Imagine 5G, what that would add in terms of services and levels of granularity. Which aren't possible with TAP today.
So I suppose one of the last things I'd like to look at, and again, I'm going to kick it off with Xavier, but maybe again, Douwe, you want to come in later on this, is so what are the top issues the industry needs to do or to tackle to help BCE be as efficient as possible?
So I think, well, BCE comes on top of TAP. So it's not there. Well, it's there to replace TAP on the long run, but it will not replace TAP on the short term. So in a way, BCE is increasing the complexity of the billing and the invoicing for the operators, because they will have to support those two standards in parallel. So we will need to make sure that we find ways to smooth the implementation of BCE on top of the existing TAP flows. Now, in regions where 2G and 3G networks are being phased out, so only 4G and 5G will remain. And so, well, the roaming will be entirely based on data roaming. So using VoLTE for voice and using SMS on IP for messaging. So TAP could easily be phased out by those operators. But as mentioned by Douwe, so, well, of course, those operators will also need their roaming partners to support BCE if they want to stop exchanging TAP files and only focus on BCE. So that's really why we need to convince tier 1, but also tier 2 and tier 3 operators to implement BCE on medium term, because otherwise the billing complexity will never decrease. So another point is also that BCE is based on aggregation, and it only supports wholesale roaming. So BCE does not provide IMSI level information. And so this could have impacts on the operators that today have in place some billing or some roaming reporting system that is really using this low-level information in TAP. And it's also causing challenges to support specific use case like MVNO roaming billing, or sponsor-based roaming billing. So those specific use case needs to be addressed and standardized by the GSMA.
I've just had the signal that I think we need to wrap up now. So many thanks, guys, Douwe and Xavier, for your time this afternoon. Very informative as ever. Many thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you to you, Windsor, as well. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Windsor. Thanks, Matt.